so many of them will say, oh, I'm just now getting my first sheep or my first cattle. Tell me what drugs I need to have on hand for when they get sick. I don't want people to think that way. I want them to think about what are they going to do with their soils and their pastures, so they don't even have to think about having a sick animal or having a Band-Aid that they put, to treat that sick animals. Because I want these producers to consider the fact that animals don't have to get sick.
In this episode of Voices from the Field, Arkansas veterinarian Dr. Ann Wells talks with NCAT livestock specialist Linda Coffey about her experience raising healthy animals and helping other farmers do the same. She shares her journey from conventional veterinary medicine to holistic animal health, and she offers practical ways to keep your own livestock healthy. Let's listen.
This is Linda Coffey with NCAT Southeast, and today I'm so excited to bring you my friend and my mentor, Dr. Ann Wells. Ann is a veterinarian. She's an educator of farmers. She's mentored many farmers, including me. She raises grass-fed beef and lamb. She's one of the founders of the Grassroots Grazing Group. She's our Soil for Water Science Advisor and a mentor for women, livestock, and the land. I am so impressed with all the skills that Ann has, and there's so much we could talk about. But today, I want us to talk about holistic animal health. So it's a big topic. We're not going to hit on the whole subject, of course, today. But Ann, I would like you to talk about your background as a veterinarian and your journey from conventional veterinary medicine to the way you think about animal health now. Please. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for having me. I was conventionally trained as a veterinarian, and I was in private practice, both in small animal and mixed animal practices, and then I had my own sheep and goat practice. And I was practicing conventionally until I ended up with some producers, some sheep and goat producers who were interested in alternative therapies. Now, at the same time that this was happening, I was also gardening organically, and I realized that I was not using any kind of chemicals on my garden, so why was I using chemicals on my animals? And I think that's where the discussion began with our producers. And so that started me on the journey that I have been on ever since then, and that's been about 35 years ago. So I started looking at different modalities, but I had producers who really wanted to keep their animals healthy. And in looking at different modalities such as homeopathics or herbs of different kinds, I realized I was still treating sick animals. So then I started looking for the key to keeping animals healthy. And finally, I realized that it was nutrition. And like veterinarians and medical doctors all over, we don't get taught too much nutrition in medical or vet school. And so I had to really learn a lot of nutrition on my own. And that's where I came across the concept of controlled rotational grazing. And that was the answer that I was looking for. And so ever since then, I have limited the amount of medicines that I even need to use. I work to keep the animals healthy so that I don't even have to deal with sickness. And then I've worked with producers on setting up wellness programs so that they can do the same thing. And it all revolves around good nutrition and limiting stress.
And limiting stress. Yes, I love that. That whole mindset shift from treating sick animals to keeping our livestock healthy is huge. And I just really appreciate your perspective and how you teach about that. So you've said nutrition and limiting stress. Can you talk about, for example, what are some stresses that we as producers should be aware of?
The biggest stress is nutritional status. And so that's what I really focus on. If people have sick animals, for example, they really need to look and figure out what is the nutrition of those animals. And so if they can have what the animals need to eat as many days out of the year from the pasture alone, then that's going to keep healthier animals. And because that's also going to give you more profit too. is providing what the animals need on pasture alone. And then when there isn't the pasture available, then supplementing with healthy supplements that are inexpensive. And so if we understand that nutritional status is the most important thing, all the other stresses tend to be less important. But there are other stresses like temperature, rainfall, animal handling, parasites is a big stress, of course. Things like giving birth, that's part of the natural cycle, but it still is a stress on those mothers. So things like that.
Yeah, transportation stress comes to mind too. When we haul animals, we are stressing them out.
Yes.
Yeah. So we support our animals. I'm hearing you say we support our animals with good nutrition. That's the first foundation.
Yes.
What are some other ways that we support our animals in staying healthy?
We've got to learn how to observe them and figuring out which ones look healthy. We want to always provide minerals and then water. And water right now is probably the most important thing because most of us across the country, certainly in the South and West, are dealing with really hot and very dry weather. And so water is, of course, part of nutrition, but it is one of the major things. Down in the South especially, we've got to provide shade, particularly in the summertime, because those animals will just be more stressed if they don't have some shade. And that doesn't mean they're going to sit in the shade all the time. We select for animals that will be out grazing, even in the heat of the day. And I'm always impressed when I go out and see my animals out grazing. We have a lot of red cattle instead of black cattle because the black cattle are just hotter and they tend to have more flies. And so we choose red animals for that reason. A lot of people in the deep South will have Brahman influenced cattle because once again, they can handle the heat better.
So I'm hearing you say having animals that are adapted to your conditions is one of the keys to having healthy livestock.
Yes, that's right.
Let's back up. What is your definition of health?
This was something that I actually had to take a long time to find because when I started on this journey of going from conventional medical thinking to holistic medical thinking, I realized that I did not get taught about health in vet school. I got taught how to treat disease. And it took me a long time to find a definition that I really liked. But my definition of health is the mind and body together in harmony with the environment. And that goes along with the whole holistic thinking aspect because it's not just the animals, it's how the animals are doing in their environment. And everybody's environment is different. And so they have to find the livestock that are going to fit their environment. And so we've got to think about not only the animals, but the pasture they're on, and then the soil. The soil health is going to play a big role in how healthy the pastures are. And then the animals' manure and urine fertilizes that soil. So it's a big cycle, and it's a closed system. And anytime we do anything to any of the farm, then we are affecting all of that. So everything's related to it. So for example, if I go out and I build one strand of electric fence so that I am keeping the animals on one section of my pasture, I am having an impact on both the soil and the forages. And then on top of that, the weather is always important because it can be an overriding factor.
Yeah, the weather is definitely a factor for us here in Arkansas right now. It's been hot. It's been dry. I can't even remember when the last rain was. And I know it's nothing compared to what people in Montana and California and Texas have suffered. I can't even imagine because it gets stressful for us as managers when we see the grass is not growing. The animals still need to eat. And the pastures that have shade, they don't all have shade. Do you have a trick for how to make use of those pastures where you don't have shade, but you need to use the pasture? You know what I'm saying? When it's 105 degrees.
Yes. There are shade structures that can be built, and a lot of people have gone to those. You have to know how many animals you need to get under the shade in order to determine the size. Most of them are some structure that have shade cloth on the top of them. They've got to be lightweight enough that they can be moved around, but you can't have them so lightweight that if a big windstorm comes up, it doesn't just blow them over and then possibly injure the animals. And some people have shade structures that can actually be laid on their side so that then they're also a windbreak. Because in the wintertime, which will happen again, we do need to be aware of wind, particularly when there's any ice or snow or rain falling. So shade is very important. I'm very fortunate on my farm. I've got woods that transect my farm. So I built my permanent electric fence inside the woods a little bit so that no matter where the animals were, they always had shade to go to. But not everybody is lucky enough. And in years past, people would buy farmland and then go and cut all the trees down because they wanted to either have it for haying or they thought it looked more aesthetically pleasing. So if you are looking for a farm or you have a new farm, you've got to really think about where is your shade.
And that was thoughtful planning of your fence. And I love what you said, because thinking of the farm as a whole system, those trees are important for a lot of other reasons too.
They sure are.
And so
yes.
People thoughtfully putting trees and shrubs and brush onto their farm, I think that's really valuable for the entire ecosystem. I was thinking about night grazing too.
Yes.
It's the full moon right
Yes.
now as we're speaking. And I know that our animals will graze quite a bit at night when the temperatures are so hot in the day and they're kind of needing to be still
Yes.
during the heat. And
Yes.
so moving them to a fresh pasture in the evening and letting them on there all night could be one way to use a pasture that's intolerable during the day for us anyway.
Yes, that's a very good point. Yes, have your treeless pastures be grazed at night, and save your ones with trees during the day.
But you were observing to me that some of your animals don't mind the heat.
That's right.
And so, can you say something about what we as producers should be observing right now?
We should be observing those that are getting out and grazing in the heat and figuring out who they are. Sometimes it's a certain breed. And so, for example, we've got some South Pole cross cows that are black because their mothers were black, and they still get out and graze quite a bit. We need to see when they're grazing and when they're not grazing. I've often thought that if we could select for those animals that get out and graze during the day regardless, but if you have a very, very big herd or flock, then that's probably going to be more difficult because some are going to be grazing some days and then others will be grazing other days. One thing I always do look for also as a good sign of stress in my cattle is how many have flies on them and which ones they are. And usually the ones that have the most flies are the black animals because once again, they're a little bit hotter, so they're a little bit more stressed, and so then they'll have more flies on them. So that's another thing that I really look for. I look for the hair coat also. We have ended up selecting bulls that came from the deep south because they had shorter hair coats. They passed that on to their offspring, and therefore they shed off more quickly, or they don't even grow as heavy a winter coat, and then they're able to adapt to the heat much more quickly also.
So choosing your genetics with that environment in mind, and then paying attention, because even though your intentions are always, I'm aiming for this, when the breeding happens, some of the animals will do what we thought and some won't.
That's right.
So
that's right. Yes.
I guess that brings us to the point of observation. Could you describe how you each day go out to your farm and look at your stock and what you're trying to observe on your farm, not just your stock? I was telling you, I have the habit, or had in the past, of only thinking about the livestock, and that's a mistake. So maybe we should start with that.
Okay.
With
Yes.
what do you look at? What are your thoughts about keeping livestock healthy, and where do you begin?
Yes. So I want you to visualize the food pyramid, except in this case, it's going to be an animal health pyramid. And so at the bottom of that pyramid is soil life and balance. And right above that is pastures and grazing management. And if we can go out and we can figure out how healthy our soil life is and how healthy our pastures are, we do that with soil tests, with figuring out our pasture diversity. We need to make sure that we're providing water to our livestock. That's where we need to focus our time and our money. And then we think about the breeding of our animals. So what breeds do we have and how well are they able to tolerate our conditions? Then at the top of that pyramid is what I put down as Band-Aids. And I consider a Band-Aid anything that I have to spend money for. So when I'm working with new producers especially, so many of them will say, oh, I'm just now getting my first sheep or my first cattle. Tell me what drugs I need to have on hand for when they get sick. I don't want people to think that way. I want them to think about what are they going to do with their soils and their pastures so they don't even have to think about having a sick animal or having a Band-Aid that they put, to treat that sick animals. Because I want these producers to consider the fact that animals don't have to get sick. So that's where I am with that kind of a focus. So when I'm going out to look at my animals, I am at first looking at the entire scene in front of me, which includes the animals from a distance as if they're one animal on the land. So that's letting me look at the pastures, how tall the pasture is, what is in that pasture, if it's what I want it to be. And then I'm looking at the herd or flock as one animal. And so are they behaving like I want them to behave? I don't want them to see me at that point. So I'm just looking at how they're reacting to their own environment. Then as I walk closer to them, then I expect their behavior to change. If it's my own animals, they may really not pay any attention to me. But if they're wanting to move to a new pasture, they may all stand up and start coming towards me and telling me that they want to move. But if I'm going to somebody else's farm, the minute that I go up to that flock or that herd, they should view me as a predator and they should all stand up and face and look at me. And if they don't, those are the ones I'm going to look at because those are the ones that I need to figure out you're not acting normal, or at least not normal in my viewpoint. Is there something wrong with you?
So they need to be alert and responsive.
Yes.
To
that's right.
a perceived threat or just an observer.
That's right.
NCAT's Soil for Water connects you with farmers, ranchers, and land managers who are discovering practical ways to catch and hold more water in their soils. Find their stories of success, practical tips for soil health, and more at soilforwater.org.
Okay, now you've noticed how the whole group is acting. What are some things that you want to see besides that alertness? What are some things that you like to see the animals doing?
Okay. Well, if it's a cow, I want her to have a wet nose because she licks her nose all the time. So I'm looking for that. I'm looking for a full rumen, and the rumen is on the left upper flank side, and I want it to be bulging out a little bit. I certainly don't want it to be empty. I'm looking for an animal that is bright-eyed, erect ears, that has a good quality hair coat, and that is so dependent on the species. Some goats have a rough hair coat just naturally, but it should still be pretty shiny. And not dandruff or anything like that. I then, of course, look for obvious signs of disease, such as diarrhea or limping or runny nose, but they need to be looking contented and they need to be looking bright and alert.
And I like to see them chewing their cud.
Oh,
that
yes.
always makes me feel like, okay, everything's good.
Yes,
we're all good.
Yes. And that brings up a good point that I forgot to mention. These animals should be eating, sleeping, or chewing their cud because they do that about equal amounts of a 24-hour day. And yes, if they're chewing their cud, then that means they're healthy because when an animal first starts showing any signs of stress, then their rumen shuts down and they quit chewing their cud. So that's a good sign.
And remembering that a stress can be nutritional. If we're not giving them enough pasture, we're putting them under stress.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So I like what you said about the Band-Aids and that idea. I was telling you earlier, I went to a conference and heard Dr. D.G. Pugh talking about internal parasites. This was years ago. And he's very fun to listen to, first of all. But he stood up there and he said, dewormers are the worst way to manage internal parasites. And I was so shocked because I was like your other producers thinking, well, that's the only way that we manage internal parasites. But in fact, he was absolutely right. It changed my thinking from about the Band-Aids, about the drugs, about whatever kind of expensive thing you think you need
Yes.
to keep your animals healthy, to the management and particularly the pasture management that can set your animals up for success. And so I think that's huge, that whole mindset shift and that idea that we can prevent illness, at least most of the time, that they don't have to be sick. That's great. You have talked about vitality, and I like the way you have taught about that because I hadn't thought in those terms. You've just explained some of the observation that we do with our livestock. Is it possible to articulate how you see vitality when you're looking at your livestock?
Yes. So vitality is the subtle energy that all of us exude. And we can actually go out and kind of graph our entire herd or flock on a scale of how vital they look. So those ones that are bright and alert, chewing their cud, they have a high level of vitality. They're very healthy. Those that are sick have very low vitality. But in between those that are doing really, really well and those that are obviously sick, you probably have a few that don't do as well in your environment. Mm-hmm. So they might have a puny calf. They may not breed back. In these times of high heat and dryness, they may look thinner. They're not eating as well. So they have less vitality. And when they have less vitality, then the stresses that are occurring on a daily basis are going to affect them more. And keep in mind that stresses are additive. Mm-hmm. So we can have like a bare pasture, for example. So they have no good nutrition going into them. Or we can have a bunch of little stresses like it's starting to get hot. We've got some ewes that have got too many parasites, and then they give birth. And that can end up being as heavy a stress level on that animal as just nothing to eat at all. So always keep in mind that stresses can be additive. We need to figure out on those ones that are not doing as well right now, what can we do? So this is a good time to really go out and categorize how vital all of your animals look because it is hot and dry right now. Mm-hmm. So those that are not doing as well right now, we need to figure out why are they not? Did they just give birth? Are they lactating heavily? Or do they just not fit your system? And maybe these are the ones that you need to put on a call list.
And when our pastures are getting short and we are running out of feed, this is a perfect time. I love what you said. It's a perfect time to assess our flock, our herd, and figure out who needs to leave our farm and go to where they can thrive.
Yes.
And cut our costs and preserve what feed we have left to get us through this time.
Very true. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
When we think of the whole system, that's also including us. Yes. And our money.
Yes.
And so I appreciate what you said about what we do to one part of the system does impact the rest of it. And so even though it's hard to sell livestock, sometimes that can be a win-win, actually giving more feed for the rest of the stock, letting you keep the health of your pasture and your soils and saving you money in the long run, because we're about to be to the hay feeding stage, at least on my farm.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Great. So we've talked about advice for getting through the heat, and we've talked about how making sure they have some shade and water. I had somebody tell me, and I hadn't thought of this before, that we need to feel the temperature of our water tanks. I know your system probably, with as many livestock as you have, it's circulating cool water in there all the time.
Yes.
It's not an issue. But for some producers that don't have as much stock and maybe use a stagnant tank, that water can be very hot.
Yes, it can.
They are not going to drink enough if the
That's
water
right.
is hot.
That's right.
They also don't like it if it's green.
Oh,
Like,
yes,
completely
that's very
green.
true. Yes, yes.
So paying attention to the quality and the coolness of the water. And I've heard you mention before, floats. Are they working?
Yes.
Just making sure that.
That's right. Well, and also another thing that I have found is that some people will think to themselves, oh, well, they don't have water right now, but I'm going to open up that gate later on. No, these animals need to have water when they want it, not necessarily when it's convenient for you. Because if they don't get water, and I have seen cases of this happening, then when they finally do get water, they're just mobbed around the water tanks. They have the chance of injuring themselves, and it's very stressful to watch, and it's certainly stressful on the animals
yeah.
too.
So you've just added more stress to their day.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So I'm hearing you say we need to be good stewards of our livestock,
Yes.
but not baby them.
That's right. That's right. Yes. And sometimes there's a fine line. When I was in private practice with my sheep and goat practice, I had a lot of producers who had never had anybody to turn to ask questions of, and they were so panicked about treating their animals right and being too afraid that they were going to hurt their animals by doing something wrong. And I finally learned that if I just said to them, your animals live in spite of you, not because of you, that a lot of times that gave them the chance to relax and not worry too much. Because if you've done something the same way for a lot of years, and you were in a routine of deworming or vaccinations or giving birth or breeding, you think that if you don't do it that way one time, you're going to go out the next day and all your animals are going to be dead. And this is where observations are so important, and learning how to observe a healthy animal and when is that animal not showing signs of health.
I like that idea of we just need to learn to trust. If we're providing those fundamentals, our animal's immune system and our animal's bodies are going to be just fine. So let's review, what are those fundamentals?
So we need to make sure that we have healthy animals to start off with. Animals that have been raised in the same environment that you're going to raise them in. So, for example, if you're going to raise animals out on pasture, you don't want to buy your animals from somebody who's had them up in a barn feeding them out of feed sack all the time. We also want to make sure that our soils are as healthy as possible, that that we know what the nutrients in the soils are. We need to know that we've got the pasture that those animals need, that they have plenty of water, and that the animals are in good body condition, that they're in a clean environment, which is one of the advantages of grazing, is because they're out on pasture all the time. They're not up in a muddy or dusty lot all the time. And then that they're not overcrowded. So nobody ever wants to start off a farm being fully stocked, because those animals breed and give birth, and those numbers can really go up very quickly. And that's when people run into trouble. When their animals are too crowded, and then we go through a drought, hot weather, the pasture dries up, and the animals are looking for something to eat, poor nutritional status, and then we end up with sick animals.
Yeah, absolutely. You said something about soil health that made me think we should mention we are both working on a project called Soil for Water. So soilforwater.org. I'll put the link in the notes. We're a bunch of producers and researchers and educators working to improve and encourage better soil health practices across the nation. But Ann and I are working in the South, in Arkansas specifically. We would like you producers to join. We would like you to let us know what's been working for you. And then we have many resources at the ATTRA website, which I will link, about improving soil health and grazing management, because this is key to keeping our animals healthy. And I appreciate you bringing that out. And I guess I'd like you to say, and you already have given quite a bit of advice for people who are wanting to improve the health of their stock. And I heard you say, consider the source. So we've said this before. Let's say it again. Don't buy your breeding stock from sale barns, because they will have been exposed to disease, even if they were healthy when they went there. Mm-hmm. And they maybe weren't healthy when they went there. Mm-hmm. So we want to avoid preventable things like buying foot rot to bring to your farm. We've talked about this a lot. We want to get animals adapted to our conditions and our management. So I've made the mistake, Anne, of buying sheep that had been raised in a dry lot, and I knew it. Mm-hmm. I thought they'd catch on to grazing fast. Mm-hmm. They did not. Mm-hmm. Your guideline of it takes at least a year, I would confirm. Mm-hmm. And then just making sure that we are providing them tall enough forage. I'm a sheep producer, and so this is a big thing for me, is not letting them graze too short, because then we're going to get into internal parasite issues. Low stress handling, water, plenty of feed. Really, those are the fundamentals, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They are, yes.
Yeah. So where would you suggest people go to get more information to help them down this journey of learning more about holistic animal health and how to keep their animals healthy rather than treat sickness?
Most people are going to have more knowledge about their animals than their soils and their pastures, so they need to figure out where their least amount of knowledge is. There's some very good books that will really talk about controlled grazing. Jim Garish has got 2 books. Talking to your NRCS office can provide you with a lot of information about your soils and your pastures. There is the National Grazing Lands Coalition, and there's state chapters that can provide you with a lot of information. Let me go ahead and put a plug in for our grazing group that Linda talked about. If you can find a grazing group in your area, those are made up mainly of producers, and it's a great network to get to know other producers who are doing grazing management on their farms, because I can't overemphasize the importance of grazing management for healthy animals. And if you're not familiar with how to set it up, or you think it's going to be a lot of work, or that your animals won't want to move, then finding a grazing group that will help you learn how to do that will be very invaluable. There are some websites that you can go to find veterinarians that are interested in holistic veterinary medicine. The biggest one is the American Holistic Vet Med Association, which is ahvma.org. There's actually a site on that website where you can look up for veterinarians in your area. Most of them work with dogs and cats, but a lot of the different modalities can be used equally, regardless of the species of animals. Parasites is probably the biggest stress outside of nutrition for especially sheep and goats, and wormex.info is where you can go to get so much information on how to handle parasites in sheep and goats.
And I have to agree, and I want to reiterate, having a mentor and being able to get out on somebody's farm is huge for learning and for like training your eyes and for getting the support from others. So I would absolutely agree with you that if listeners, if you can find a grazing group or start one, that can be so wonderful. And I appreciate your mentoring. I know you and I both appreciate Dr. Ron Morrow for the mentoring he's given both of us over the years. I think finding somebody who is managing the way you'd like to manage and has healthy animals can be a great way to learn. And there's something about getting out on a farm and walking on it and asking questions of the producer that is so helpful. Of course, NRCS has a lot of expertise to offer. whether you participate in their programs or you don't, they have a lot of technical expertise, and we are blessed in Arkansas. Our state grazing land specialist does a wonderful Tuesday pasture talk every week and has for like 2 years, where he provides topics of interest to people who are grazing, and it's a Zoom. If anyone wants to get on that list, you can email me at lindac@ncat.org, and I can point you in that direction. There's so much information out there. And I think that's one thing that I would like to say is you do need to be careful of your source of information, because while it's wonderful that there's a lot out there, there is also a lot of very confident sounding nonsense.
Yes.
And so I would encourage you to be careful and test the truth of it by going to farmers around. But if you're doing something different from your neighbors, for example, if you're doing rotational grazing or would like to and your neighbors don't, look for help outside of your region. There are plenty of mentors and examples around. And any follow-up?
Other than trying to find local sources as much as possible, but also don't be afraid to go up and ask questions of somebody, because I have found very few producers are reluctant to help somebody. They have learned things the hard way, and they are very eager to pass that knowledge on to others. So if you see somebody that's doing something and you want to know why they're doing it, stop and talk to them, because they will 9 times out of 10 be more than happy to talk to you about it.
Absolutely. Check out your state grazing lands coalition. They will likely have conferences, and participate in that. Also, wouldn't to say, how can they reach you, Ann, or find out more about what you do?
You can go to our grass-fed meat website, ozarkpasturebeef.com. There is a page on that where I have a lot of the information about stress, as well as how to assess pastures and animals on there. So you can find that there. My email address is annw@pgtc.com. You are welcome to email me anytime that you want to.
Thank you, Ann. And thank you
you.
so much for being here. Thank you for sharing. And I just really appreciate you so much. So have a great day, and thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.